Welcome back to Geeks and Grounds, a monthly game club where we play games and brew good conversation together through weekly podcasts and forum discussions in Discord. I am your host, Jenny Wyndham.
And I'm Joel Thomas.
And we are officially in summer. I feel like we can now officially say summer is begun. I don't know if in the Gregorian calendar that's a real thing, or if it's happened, but we've got Summer Game Fest this week. So it has been a packed week of announcements and games and reveals.
I think from now on, we stop measuring seasons based on equinoxes and things like that and purely base our calendar on video game experiences.
That has been my life for the last few years. So honestly, that checks out for me. I'm like, is it Summer Game Fest season? Is it Game Awards season? Those are the two seasons of the year for me at this point. Is it PAX time? Yeah. So, we're going to be talking about Summer Game Fest, some of the announcements that we've been able to catch, what's caught our eye, as well as continuing in our monthly brew of 1000xRESIST. We played 3 chapters. We went through chapters 3, 4, and 5 this week, and they were doozies. So we are going to have a lot to dig into there.
It's a thick sode, everybody. We got a thick sode coming your way.
Ew, that sounds so... It's like chunky. That's like a chunky sounding phrase. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a real thick sode. Yeah, ew. I get it.
Oh, that's like a weird... I don't know if I like that. Okay. You know, it's like how some words do give like visceral reactions. Those are the two combinations of words that I've never heard together that I've realized maybe not.
Well, I'm going to reel it back in. I won't keep saying thick sode after that.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
And then you let me know as you do your personal reflection on why that is hurting you so badly. And let me know when that's feeling good.
Trauma chowder incidents in as a kid.
Precisely. This is what people come to Geeks and Grounds for, is the uncomfortable word pairings that we come up with.
Oh my gosh. So I guess Summer Game Fest, for folks who aren't familiar, haven't caught Summer Game Fest before, is technically one show where Jeff Keighley, who does the Game Awards, he's kind of, I would say, probably one of the more prominent game show guys out there. He does a summer showcase of all of the latest, biggest, greatest announcements, highlighting what's to come in the next, usually, couple of years. This is where we get a lot of AAA premieres, usually, which is a little different this year, which I think will be interesting to mention. And around his showcase, which I think happened on, Friday? There are adjacent showcases that help sort of beef up this to be almost like a full 5 days of showcases. It actually began on Thursday with the Guerrilla Collective. Friday, we had Summer Game Fest, Day of the Devs, and Devolver Digital had their showcase. Saturday, there were at least 3 showcases. I know there were more, but the ones that I really paid attention to were Wholesome Games. Yay. For folks who don't know, I'm one of the organizers. LAGS, which is the Latin American Games Showcase, and Women-Led Games. Oh, and Future of Play, Glitch. And then we had the PC Gamer Showcase, the Xbox Showcase today. It is just a lot. It's a lot.
It's a thick showcase.
It's a thick showcase.
Is that okay? Can we say that? That seems better.
Something about, I think, see, that works better.
Is that better?
I think, what was it?
Sewed. What are you saying? That's weird.
We said sewed. I think the sewed was kind of like the weird, like that in combination with thick. Something about it was like hit my ears. But yeah, thick show.
Case.
We can go with that.
Very good. I learned from you right before this that Wholesome is part of this. I've watched you do things with Wholesome for years, and I had no idea it was connected to a bigger picture at all.
Yeah, so we have been a part of Summer Game Fest for the last couple of years. So we're one of the adjacent showcases. Yeah, so it's really like, again, I have my feedback and criticisms of Jeff for sure. But I do think that, I appreciate and acknowledge that he has given platform to showcases like ours. And I'm not going to discount that because, again, he doesn't have to. And he's been really kind when working with us in terms of being like, what do you need? If I can do it, I'll give it, I'll give it what I can. So we do get a huge influx of viewers because he helps us by platforming us on his show. And then, we have our own audience as well, but he reaches so many more people. I will say there was an article that came out. There were two. One was an interview with Esquire. One was an article with Polygon that I will be sure to link in the show notes when they go out with the newsletter. But they talk about how the showcase costs, the Summer Game Fest showcase costs an exorbitant amount for anyone who wants to participate. I think a 30-second spot was something around like $250,000, 200K for a 30-second or a minute spot. Some of the longer spots going about a minute 30, $500,000. So these are really pricey placements. I will say from my experience, I have worked on games that do not have that kind of budget. The vast majority don't. And Jeff does allow a lot of titles to participate without paying that. He does. I don't know who exactly he charges. Sometimes you can tell, like Supercell, which is a mobile game company, they were in the showcase. I imagine they probably paid that $500,000 fee to showcase. But if you are lucky enough to be an indie game or a game that doesn't have the budget, if he likes you, which that is the caveat, and that's where it's like a little bit murky because he has to enjoy what you do. But if he likes you and you need that showcase spot and he wants to give it to you, he will give it for free. And they mentioned this in the articles. So I want to make sure and give that full picture. I don't think any spot though should cost that much money. I think that is kind of I would love to know the budget because it seems like a lot. But who knows? Maybe the stuff that he rents is that expensive. I just feel like
someone's making some money there.
I feel like someone's making some money. And I would love to just have a bit more transparency about what happens with this show and like the budget for it. I think it can only make for a better experience for everyone participating. But yeah, I don't know. Did you have a chance to catch like maybe part of the Wholesome Direct or see any of like the announcements?
No, or
are you catching up later?
Yeah, I just finished moving and it's been kind of a wild time. I learned how to propagate plants yesterday. That was my big thing. Nice. Someone sent me as a housewarming gift unpropagated cuttings. Is that what they're called? You get a cutting? Okay. And so it came with a little thing of Leica or something, and it was like, well, I have to do something with these cuttings. They're literally just on my table. And so I spent hours figuring this out yesterday, which was a good time, but that was my time that I would have spent learning what was going on. What was the first group that you said? Was it Gorilla something that did something with
Gorilla Collective?
What's the energy from that? What are they there for?
So that is run by, I think, the folks behind the Mix, which they do a lot of different showcases throughout the year, primarily indie. I think the lead is still Justin Woodward. He is awesome. He's been an advocate for indies for honestly upwards of a decade now, probably.
That's awesome.
And so they do a lot of like really indie showcases, and they uncover a lot of gems, and they give opportunities to, I think, a lot of indies who may not make it into showcases like, Jeff Keighley's Summer Game Fest. Like they're not at that scale or scope. So it's a really solid indie showcase.
Man, that's very cool. Yeah, I'm glad that you guys are getting opportunities to be a part of that. Like, I feel like if it was just this is 2 weeks in a row of me being a little critical of the AAA world, but like if it was just like AAA releases, like that's very one note. And
yeah. Well, I think it's quite interesting. Summer Game Fest this year, notably, was a lot less AAA than I thought it was going to be. Like even Jeff's showcase was much more indie feeling in a lot of ways. I caught up to the PC gaming showcase. It also had a lot more, PC gaming in particular had more cozy titles, which I thought was really fascinating, like cozy world premieres. So it's interesting to see the tonal shift. I don't know if it was a result of, we're in one of those years where we have a bit of a lull where a lot of AAA games launched last year and the year before. We're kind of in that transition state where I think a lot of developers are also moving towards the next generation of consoles. They're starting to plan ahead a little bit more, which is a little rough to hear because a lot of people don't even have a PS5, for example.
Yeah.
But I think we're in this phase of AAA where they're all hunkering down and either just announcing or in the midst of developing. So we're not getting new releases as much as we were like immediately after, I would say, like the initial years of the pandemic, because we're still technically in it.
I could use I could use a Breath of the Wild break. I feel like having a second to get caught up on all the games that have been coming out is something that I would appreciate. What you're reminding me of, though, is I wonder if it was maybe January or February. I think you shared an article with us about how kind of coziness had been kind of co-opted, and that idea was something that was kind of losing meaning, and they basically like the marketing hooks had kind of dug in. Do you think that there's any element of that with the showcase, where it's like because they know that there's a burgeoning market there, that maybe that's why they're pushing into that direction a little bit?
I think there's probably some of that. A lot of these games, if we think about the development cycle and like when games announce, a lot of the times they're announcing closer to their launch versus like earlier in production. So these games have been in development for probably a couple of years already. So it's not like right now they're kind of hopping on the zeitgeist. I think like with any product, it's a mix of all of the above, right?
Yeah.
There's probably an element of marketing like, oh, hey, this is becoming more popular, let's explore it. But also, I don't discount there's a lot of publishers and developers who are genuinely interested in creating something that is different for them, as well as for players. So yeah, a little bit of all of the above. Also, I do think a lot of these games look really good, honestly. There was one at the PC Gaming Showcase. Oh, what was it called? Let me bring it up because I had the title up. It was a first-person game, which also surprised me because normally I'm not really I don't gravitate towards first-person titles, but it's called Among the Wild, and it looked so cute. It looked like you're kind of this shepherd of very goofy, fluffy-looking critters. They will probably give you resources, just it looks like a farming sim in first person. But the art style is really great. Again, the critters look really goofy. They look like fluff balls with huge eyes, and way that they've animated like the eating, for example, is just really cute. But yeah, PC Gaming Showcase, not showcase, had a lot of really, really good games. I have to shout out Generation Exile, just because a couple of my friends at Sonderlust, they're the developers for it. That one is a game about basically building up a civilization in this more sustainable way in this sort of circular spaceship. That's a very like gross understanding of what the whole game is about, but it's a really cool like narrative experience. So Generation Exile is one I'd shout and say take a look at. I'm trying to think. Fable during the Xbox Game Showcase. I know folks were talking about it in Discord.
Oh, man.
Fable had a release window announcement trailer, and the trailer's hilarious. It's very like they're leaning into a lot of humor. They're leaning into like the sort of the Britishness of being in this like fairy tale world with your choices and your reputation. Like I think they phrase it as like your reputation precedes you, and so that's going to impact how everyone interacts with you. True Fable style, and I think the window was 2025, so we're supposed to get Fable next year.
Wow,
that's really big.
That is huge. Yeah.
And I think another standout for me was probably on the AAA side, South of Midnight. This was Compulsion Games. If you haven't seen South of Midnight, it's kind of like a Soulsy, or it draws from Souls types of combat, but it's set in what looks like sort of like a Louisiana bayou kind of environment, which is really cool. Basically, so I grabbed a little blurb here. So it's an adventure platformer packing soulsy combat with a protagonist named Hazel, a weaver imbued with magical energies, going toe to toe with nasty bayou monsters. And so, like in the trailer itself, they had this like island, but it actually turned out the island was on the back of this giant like alligator. And so just things like that, I think.
I fucking love it when there are islands on the back of animals. It's one of my favorite things.
Yes, super cool. So that one intrigued me when they announced it, I think like last year. And so it was cool to see that they're still working on it and we got more gameplay. I haven't even gotten to the indies. These are just like the bigger announcements, I would say. But I will just shout out, this wasn't in the showcases, but Fields of Mystria had a demo out at the same time as a lot of these showcases. And it's just going to be, I think it's going to be maybe one of the greater farming sims out ever. So yeah. But yeah, that's Summer Game Fest. Yeah, it would be cool if you caught up to it, like let me know like what you gravitate towards, because I think this is a really nice opportunity to see like what's coming out in the next couple of years, see what people are going to be hyped about, see what people are going to be talking about.
My brother did send me, now that I'm thinking about it, it must have come from Game Fest. There was some Soulsy game that looked like it was more set in like a Japanese setting or era, like that type of mythology influencing the world, which I feel like there are a few different titles that have tried to go that way in the last couple of years. This one did look really gorgeous, but I'll see if I can track that down and find a few points of interest from the experience.
Yeah, and we'll keep talking because Summer Game Fest bleeds into this week. If you're listening to this as we release, it's Steam Next Fest. So it's another session of demos coming out. Now, Steam Next Fest, fortunately, tries to limit the release window of the demos that you play. Technically, I think the rules are if you have a demo that's out, your game is supposed to generally release within the year or within a year, not like this year.
Yeah.
So this is nice because we're getting a more consolidated taste of what's to come that we can play perhaps more immediately. But a lot of these demos release during Summer Game Fest because that like starts this momentum and then continue the demo availability usually about technically a week after Next Fest. So if you're interested, next week we're going to be talking about demos. So as you play, if you're interested in sending them my way via email, jenny@geeksandgrounds.com, or post them in the Discord, we'll share some highlights as we listen to or as we read them.
So, it was really fun in the winter Steam Next Fest, if it's called that. Hearing from the community in Discord the games that were played, there were several that I got to be a part of that I certainly would never have tried if it hadn't been for the people in the community. So that's great.
We got one of our selections, Steam Next Fest, from Steam Next Fest American Arcadia, that got put onto our radar because of the demo. The demo was so good. I was like, we certainly should give the full game a try. I think 9 Souls, which you've been playing. We also all played, many of us at least, played that demo. So how has 9 Souls been for you?
I'm several hours in at this point and very much loving it. I now know what the souls are, which is great. I'm liking the connection between how it's the idea that any technology sufficiently advanced seems like magic, which is some like sci-fi. I can't remember who coined that phrase, but like that is very much the world that we are in. And I did not realize this from the demo, but the character that you're playing is essentially from that old world and so understands the technology. And it's a really fun thing that you are playing a character that does know the tech of everything that's happening, but you, the player, don't. Because it's a lot of like, sometimes they'll explain to you what's going on. And sometimes it's like, oh no, this is just so obvious. Like, I'm not going to explain to you what's going on.
Interesting.
I also, now that I'm a couple hours in, I'm thinking back to our conversation last week about kind of the tonal shift. And I do know what you're talking about. I think that's like 15 minutes into the game or so. So I was like, I don't remember there being a big twist like an hour in. And I think that's what was going on. But there's something found family-ish about it that I was not expecting, and that is really feeding me. And also, I just think the combat and the responsiveness is very cool. So, so far, really enjoying it, and it would recommend based on about how far I am at this point, just a couple hours in. So
nice, that's great. Yeah, It's on my list to play along with so many other games. So I'm hoping eventually when I am done traveling and things slow down a little bit, I can just sit and like just hunker down and play it for a weekend,
Yeah.
and try and get as far through it as I can, basically. But yeah, that's cool.
I'm trying to crush through that, sink several hours into it and move forward, and then get into Animal Well. That's kind of the direction that I'm looking to move. But
Nice.
with Steam Next Fest, maybe there's some good demos that are going to catch my eye and suck me down the rabbit hole this week. So
yeah,
could be fun.
Yeah. What else have you been getting into?
A show that I think I referenced a while back when the first season came out. It's called Mashal Muscles and Magic. The kind of this kid ends up going to a Harry Potter-esque world, but he just only has his muscles. He's extremely strong, extremely fast, and it's a total satire on the magic school kid house experience. And it's very fun. I'm still really enjoying it. It's gotten to the point where like there's like a couple of jokes they just like keep recycling. It's like, okay, I'm kind of over this joke. We can move on, but they've intrigued me at this point, so I'm gonna keep going. And then another one is A Sign of Affection. I just watched the first 2 episodes of it this week, and romance anime. I think the young woman that this is the central character is maybe in college, and she's deaf, and it's kind of like her trying to connect with these a couple of potential love interests at this point, and it is very cute. The soundtrack is like very chill, like the kind of music I would just like listen to in my car. So yes, 2 episodes in, would recommend if you're looking for something that's a little cozier, a little romancy, a little fun.
Oh, I love that. Where are you watching it? Where do you find that one?
It's on. I've been watching it on Crunchyroll, so maybe it's somewhere else too. But we have links in the show notes, but everything they're all the Crunchyroll pages because that's the only place that I know to link to for them. So
yeah, no, I mean that's perfect. As long as basically it's just because there's so many different anime places to find anime. I always ask, like, what's just the easiest place? And sometimes it's Crunchyroll. Most of the time it's Crunchyroll, but a lot of times I also get some answers where I'm like, I don't have a subscription there.
Yep, totally, 100%. How about you? Anything else that you've been getting into this week?
Mostly demos. I think one that's under embargo by the time this episode drops, so I can't really talk about it, I don't think. But the only other one that I've really been playing and like super digging is Fields of Mystria. Again, it's just like exactly what I want a farming sim to be. And it is a genre that has a lot of titles that have released, but like I would say really only 2 or 3 actually meet the mark that I would say is good. And one of them I think is like I'm giving a little bit more grace because it's in early access. So I'm just like, I'm waiting. Coral Island, I think, is one of the most outstanding farming sims. It still is in development. So I know technically I'm kind of jumping ahead and saying this, but I think that the developers are still working on it. So I have faith that they're going to pull through because everything that they've done thus far is so good. The other, and I'm not counting Stardew Valley, PS. We all know Stardew Valley is a good farming sim.
I haven't heard of this one. Star Drew. What was that?
Right. I think Wildflowers is the only other farming sim that I've been like, whoa, this is doing something different. It's much more narrative focused. I thought they did a really good job of making this town feel real and the community feel like just very sincere, and there's like messiness and there's conflict, but it's not ever like super I don't know. I feel like they do a really good job overall with their writing, and that's something that's really weak in a lot of farming sims. Like I know I was really looking forward to Fae Farm. I played it for 6 hours and I was just disappointed. I was really sad. I was looking forward to Palia, and that kind of just didn't grasp me. I think something about the aesthetic, I just didn't hook onto it. We don't speak of Disney Dreamlight Valley. Trash. It's sorry. I know a lot of people love it. I do not. And so I think playing Fields of Mystria and seeing how there's absolutely care to like every single character has their own room and it's all styled differently. Assets not repeated very frequently. Like the ones that repeat are the ones that make sense. Like, the produce in the grocery store. It's like, of course that's going to repeat. The trees, we're going to repeat those assets. But like, there are so many individual touches for each of the characters. They're all hot, which is great. That's my one gripe about Stardew. I can make them hot in my head, but when I'm looking at the screen, I don't think they're hot. The writing, I think I've maybe encountered the same dialogue like once in the demo. All of it was like super fresh. Everyone had new things to say, not just commenting about the weather, which is what killed me about Fae Farm. I was like, we're in fall and you're talking about the weather still. I know nothing of you. Like, this is so sad.
Give me the drama. Who are you beefing with?
Or even just, it's like, give me something to get to know you. And the animals are cute. The farming is fun. They have the added twists of like magic. So you actually have a spell that you can use to like grow your crops. So it can grow a little faster. Very limited mana. So it's like, you can't use it a ton, but you can use it in a pinch. And they allow you to like not just till your fields, but like shape your fields. And so I think people who are into designing their farms are going to have a heyday and make just the coolest designs. Because in most farming games, you get like a big plot and you cannot, like, that is just your plot and you have to work with it. The fact that they have thought through some of this stuff, I'm like, I can tell you love the genre. And what's great is a lot of people love the genre, but it doesn't come through necessarily in how they've developed their games. Like, I know, I'm sorry, it's kind of like, but it doesn't, sometimes it's not conveyed, and that may not be entirely up to their control because game dev involves a lot of things. But Fields seems like, again, from the demo, it has the potential to be truly great.
It's delivering.
I really hope I am not disappointed. They're coming out in early access in August, so that will be my hyperfixation for August.
Awesome. I can't wait to hear how it goes.
Yeah. Frankly, I didn't have a chance to get into Steam and my tracker to check for notable releases this week because it has been so busy. Between Wholesome and announcing our game and then trying to catch up to the showcases, I don't know what's coming out next week. So sorry, I'll put it in the newsletter, everyone. But I did not have time to prep it for our recording today.
Everybody should just be in Steam Next Fest this week anyway.
Yeah. Don't buy games.
Don't buy games this week. This week is a demo week. Go for free.
Yeah. Oh man. So that's the pastry case. Let's head on to this month's brew. We are in 1000xRESIST. We have already discussed the prologue and chapter 1 and chapter 2. So if you have not caught up to that discussion and you would like to, you can have a listen to our last episode. I have a sneeze just like on the tip of my nose.
I do too. What the heck?
What is going on right now? But today we're going to be talking about chapters 3, 4, and 5. As always, this is our time to deep dive, to really get into what our attention was gravitating towards. So it's all spoilers from here. Anything from the beginning of the game through the end of chapter 5, all spoilers. So that is your warning. And I did take notes, and I actually uploaded my screenshots. So I am ready.
Excellent. I will say we've been doing the game journaling thing all year. That we started this in January. I've taken more notes in this game than anything else we have played this year. There is so much happening. And like someone will just say like one random line and you're like, well, what does that mean? I gotta I don't want to lose that. So I am astounded by how deep this game is getting, and I'm really enjoying it.
Same. I think so. I've been really getting into replaying games over the last few years. Part of it is because of just like needing that sort of easiness, the ease of being able to go into something that you know kind of what's coming up, just for the mental like light load. But I've also really enjoyed replaying games because I found that usually when I play a game for the first time, I'm reacting in real time to everything that's happening. And while I try to think about it it's not always until the second time I play when things really start to click and you can start seeing some of the patterns based on what you have played all the way through.
Yeah.
This is a game, I'm like, I am writing things down. I am trying to like connect dots. I feel like I'm going to have to play this. Like, this is going to be a game I revisit a couple of times. No, maybe not immediately. I'm going to give it a little time to breathe, but I already know I'm going to be replaying this game at least once or twice more.
I will say, especially with the ending of chapter 5, I was like, I have a million questions right now, and I am eager to dive in. So,
oh man, yeah. So when we begin chapter 3, we're at the bar, which is kind of fun. we're hanging out after work drinks, and okay, what I love is we have this bartender, which I was just like, everyone are either shells moving towards a specific function or are the sisters who have been like assigned their function, and then we have bartender, and I'm like, you literally, like, your function is bartending. I don't know. I'm like, where's the bartender shell? Like, what's going on?
Someone realized early on that we needed bartender to be a function, but they were like, shit, like we can't make, there's no new colors left. We have to like.
Right. I'm like, so is bartender like a shell that's just forever never going to be a sister, but is always going to be just bartender? Technically,
you know what would be great is if the bartender just was T-Pain. If it just like was T-Pain at the bar, he did the voice acting, like, and they don't explain it. That's what would have been a really good turn for this whole experience.
But yeah, so we're beginning with this. Basically, we get to just relax a little bit, tell a few knock-knock jokes, and we are getting ready, essentially, to go, I think, to the principal to sort of do this update.
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking about this principal update because one of the things that we had talked about last week is, I think, at least I was under the impression that these communions were a way for you to uncover memories. Right. And that's kind of your communion, like you are tapping into a specific memory of the ALLMOTHER, etc. And it was through the conversation at the bar and through the conversation with the principal afterwards that it was like, oh, the sisters that we are communing with, this is not the communion memories that they got. They have never seen these before.
Yeah.
That really threw me for a loop and really made me question what is happening with communion, just period.
Yeah, I think there's this element of, because one of the lines that principal says after, I think you commune with, it's not Knower. Who's the second communion? Is it BB?
Yeah,
I think it's BB. Yeah, I think one of the lines principal says is like, okay, so she's not guilty of treason then, right? Like, you're confirming this. And so in a way, communion, which is supposed to be this like vulnerable sharing of emotions, of stories, of memories, is being twisted to be used almost as this like vetting test to verify whether someone or not has the capability or potential for being a traitor in the midst, which is really like, kind of got under my skin. But that's the way I started looking at communion, where I'm like, you're framing this thing that's supposed to be this really spiritual, vulnerable moment, but you're using it against the people that you're taking this communion with.
I am almost wondering if we need to spoil the big twist in chapter 5 to really talk about this stuff.
Well, it's a full spoiler, so I think you can go for it.
Yeah. So just because I think it shades how I go back and read these notes now. At the end of chapter 5, and we'll walk through everything that leads between now and then, but at the end of chapter 5, you get the opening cutscene again, where you go to the ALLMOTHER. You have a shard in your hand, which we now know is a shard of the secretary that's been following you around. It was very sad.
It was so sad.
You stab the ALLMOTHER, and then like the second you kill her or stab her, another train pulls up and the principal is on it. And the principal is like, you did exactly what I wanted you to do. And then we find out the principal was the youngest, which we'll
Yes.
get into all about the youngest a little bit later. But
yeah,
I say that because the thing that becomes clear at the end of chapter 5, and I don't know if you knew this was coming at the end of chapter 5 because it was the perfect place to pause for this episode. But it really changes everything I think I knew about communion, about why we are doing it, about what we are experiencing. So I think it's a really, just if we're going to be, instead of like, hey, this happens and now let's re-talk about every conversation we've had, I think it's worth just kind of like, let's just call that out. And so there's your big spoiler, everyone, for chapter 5. So given that, how does that reframe your thinking about communion and what is actually happening? Like, you used the word that it felt gross to you. So now that we know like what happened or why it was happening, like how does it inform your perspective?
Well, again, I think it's this element of manipulation that I think that really is what got me. I think there's this thread that we're going to see throughout all of these 3 chapters in particular, this idea of jealousy and of envy and how it impacts your relationship with those that you're either friends with or meant to love. And I think that for me, combined with this sort of, I would say, like, gross misuse of what I believed was meant to be this like act to get closer to mother, act to like get to know yourself in relation to the ALLMOTHER. Again, it just felt really manipulative and dirty. And knowing what we know about Iris and this idea of like, are we the same as her? We know Iris is not the nicest person, is prone to jealousy and prone to fits of very violent rage. It started bringing into question for me just the idea of like, how far away are we from this original Iris, even thousands of years into the future when we have cloned, essentially herself so long. So that doesn't quite answer the question, but I think those are all of the thoughts that came with it. It does reframe sort of the entire act of communion, but it really ended up feeling more like a trap, I would say. Like, it's been a setup this whole time.
Yeah.
Because ALLMOTHER is very suspicious. And I think as a result, many of the other sisters who've taken on some of that trait, like the youngest perhaps, through reasons that I think we'll talk through later, I think have adopted that suspicion and that sort of willingness to abuse these rituals to try and figure out who's out to get them. And I don't know. It's just a lot. But what about you? What are you thinking?
There was a lot. So first, I think that was really well said, Jenny. Like, the questions that this brought up for me were very much along the same ones they're bringing up for you. It was during this conversation with the principal when I was like, wait a second. Like, my understanding of communion was that each of these sisters gets their own communion experience and gets a memory. And once it was like, okay, that's not the case, I literally wrote down the question like, who is actually coordinating these communions? Why are we seeing these things? Like, it made sense to me if it was like somehow the memories were connected to your function. But if that's not what's going on here, it made me immediately suspicious of what is like how these communions are being or potentially are being manipulated. So given all of that, given that we know that Principal's objective here is to present a perception of reality that accomplishes her goal, which is to get the ALLMOTHER murdered, it really jades the way I think about the communions and what we're experiencing. The thing that really stands out to me, and we're going to get into this with the healer, because I think obviously at the beginning, Fixer is kind of already broke bad. Like, she's decided like ALLMOTHER is not what she's cracked up to be. She's holding back this thing from us, the cure or immunity rather. And so like Fixer from the very beginning is like not into this. BBF is a little disconnected, not super in touch with what's going on, doesn't do putting a lot of forethought into it. But we get to Healer in chapter 3 in this chapter, and it's like, oh no, she is not happy with the status quo in any way. And I think, I guess I say that to say I don't believe that these communions are happening just for the sake of Watcher. I think they are also
Yes.
happening for the sake of those sisters to continue to push them down this track of disobedience, if you will.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is I'm this has to have been happening for a long time. Again, I think this is happening within the spans of thousands of years, um, at least. And so,
Yeah.
what's really interesting is also, I realized looking back, the reluctance to which most of these sisters have engaged with the communion also makes me feel like, again, I should have maybe flagged like there's something up here because why do they feel like this is a chore? Why do they not want to do it? A lot of them are like, do we have to do this right now? Are you sure? You
Mm.
know, and so I think that's another detail that I noted, but I didn't quite think through. And I was like, if I feel like we noted that and like really thought through earlier, we could have seen or maybe predicted some of this a little sooner. So I love that they set it up in a way where it felt very like, oh my God, like, of course, what? So just really good writing on the team's part.
Yeah, yes, exactly. I think it does. It raises a lot of questions for me at this phase, which is like what lets you know that like
Mm-hmm.
the writers of this game are phenomenal.
Right.
But I am now immediately suspect too of what Fixer's experience was, such that she came to these conclusions so quickly without having to go through all the communions, was already like
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But she also had like this naivete about what was like how deep the problem goes.
Right.
And I kind of have that same sense of naivete coming from Healer. Maybe not
Mm-hmm.
Knower, which we'll get into, but
Mm-hmm.
Healer is actively working on a cure. And when we meet her after we talk to Principal, we go
Mm-hmm.
to the med bay, and like, there's a lot of things that can happen between there, which we'll cover. But we go to the
Right.
med bay, and you see that Healer is extremely affected by
Mm-hmm.
what happens with this disease.
Yeah.
And like the thing that stood out to me as I was watching it is, you know, you walk in and Healer's there, and there's a clone on the like table, and she has blood like coming out of her mouth. There was a lot of blood over what would be like her uterus or stomach. And
Mm-hmm.
given like the connection to motherhood and cloning and things like that, I was
Mm-hmm.
just wondering if that stood out to you at all as something that you're like keeping an eye on. Like,
Yeah, I didn't know exactly what to make of it, but I did basically take in the same details as you with the scene. Um, I think also a lot like a lot of the most graphic sort of violence does happen around like the gut and the
mm,
uterus, which is really interesting. Again, maybe it's an act of convenience because like that's just the place where they animated things. That's just where, oh, it seems like a lot of blood would come out of here. But I think part of it is perhaps more intentional. Yeah.
we also learned just how fragile the clones are in this world. That like
Mm-hmm.
someone slips and cracks their mask and they're dead. Like, and this is really what Healer is doing her best to try and
Right.
help with.
Right. Um, yeah, I think let's get into Healer's Communion.
Yeah.
I think this one was really interesting because we get to see essentially the initial stages, like the first sisters, essentially, which I was super interested in, and
Oh,
I was so happy that the game just was like, all right, this is the next like memory that we're gonna really let
the
you dig
perfect
into.
pace. The perfect pace.
It's
Ah.
so good. Um, And what I thought was really fascinating is they framed the entire chapter around this game of hide and seek.
Mm.
Um, and so I thought it was really, really well done. You get to know, uh, I guess, is there anything, because I'm going to jump right into the hide and seek because there's so much to cover, but is there anything before the game that you wanted to talk through?
I will just say, in addition to the hide and seek motif,
Mm-hmm.
you get a lot of scriptural motif. So it's a very different
Yes.
gameplay style during this
Right.
experience. And like
Yeah.
you literally are seeing big text in bold on the bottom of the screen, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like on the last month of the last year before it rained red, and it's like very like biblical scriptural allusions. So I just want to call that out too, because I feel like the religious aspect of all of it really starts coming through in this in a big way.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because in the UI, I've been paying attention, and I think everyone probably is paying attention, but I want to shout out the way that they frame time is differently in this than they did in the dance scene. In the dance scene, you are counting down back and forward through basically the day that everyone got sick.
Mm-hmm.
In this, you are counting forward or back, I guess, if you're going backwards, but you can move through books. And so again, going to this idea of like the book of I guess this is the book of the Iris,
Book of Iris,
or the book of ALLMOTHER, it's
like,
so I guess, again, just reinforcing that really good point you made about how this is just very biblical in its structure. And you're moving 2D side scrolling, which is also a change in perspective, which we always like to note, because that definitely indicates a sort of a reframing of how the developers want you to perceive what's going on.
And it really pays off. Man, these game creators, incredible. It really pays off in the next one too. Like each of these communions giving you that different perspective. So
oh yeah. So seeing this in that side scrolling perspective, you're moving towards, occasionally you do move towards the left, but most often I think you are moving towards the right. So that's kind of structurally, I think, a very familiar time is moving forward kind of feeling. And yeah, you do see a little bit of when I think Iris gets taken or leaves. I guess she gets picked up from her house, leaves and goes to this compound, and they do a lot of tests on her. And honestly, I got a lot of like Last of Us flashbacks. This is very like, it's another story in which this young teenage girl is being put in a position where she is the one to save the world. And I haven't dug through that idea fully yet, but I think that feels like I want to chew on that a little bit longer. But that's just a highlight that I made a note for myself right here, is just this idea of a young girl meant to do all of this really, really heavy emotional and actual like labor, making sure everyone survives.
And I think labor is a good word too, because of the cloning that has started with the military. Like it sounds like the military, or whatever the 50 group is cloning her as a way to maybe do more tests more rapidly. We don't fully know the rationale behind it yet at this point. But it is worth noting that all of this is happening inside a place that looks just like the orchard. So either it's the one that we've been living in this whole time, or it's a different one that has the same structure. But that really surprised me, that like, oh, this facility, this orchard that we're in, is in fact a remnant of this kind of military facility that she was having these tests run in when she was a child or a teenager.
Yeah. And I will note, kind of a skip forward, but because we do learn this, I think in chapter 4 or 5, we do learn that there are other buildings, like other compounds that are seemingly attempting something similar, and they are all not going well. So Iris is probably the only one that they think is like viable in terms of maybe discovering a cure or some way to defeat the occupants.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the last thing I'll call out here is something seems to be wrong with Healer. When you're kind of running forward and backwards in the story, she's having a hard time keeping up. She asks you to slow down at one point. Like, I would say that she seems sick in some way as you're in this. And there's also, this is when you start noticing, I started writing these down, weird anachronisms, things that it's like, there's no reason that you would know this expression, but like she says, like, I'm no spring chicken.
Yeah.
And like, I think Watcher is even like, I don't know that, or whatever.
What's a chicken?
Like, yeah. So it is, what it hints at to me is that somehow information is getting to the sisters. And I think coming into this, like the end of the Age of Innocence, like the way that they're kind of jaded in some way, like somehow information is getting to these sisters to take them down these paths. And I'm really curious about that.
Yeah. Let's see. I think with that, we see then the first sort of clones. We see another instance of Iris talking to Picture Zhao, which I think is just a notable, like, Iris is still carrying Zhao with her, like physically with the image, but also I think mentally and emotionally. And so we haven't fully unlocked like what's happened. Like, what happened the night of the dance? What did Iris say? That's still something that's unclear. Like, what happened between them? We know it was just very it was intense. So yeah, that's something I wanted to note. And we get to meet the clones, or the first
The first
sisters.
sisters.
Yeah, and what's really like, I think they said like the ALLMOTHER struggled to tell the sisters apart, so she assigned them each a color.
That was an interesting comment given the kind of racial undertones of all of this story.
Yeah. Sorry, you want to continue with that, or?
No, yeah, I think just calling that out, like, it was like, oh, I wrote that down. I was like, man, like, this story has a lot to say about, we've talked about this, like the diaspora elements and like the way that like you try to fit in when you're in these environments. But like the fact that the reason color codes exist at all is because the mother was having a hard time telling these women apart, was just like, it felt so like direct to me, and like, I don't know, big colonizer energy or something.
Yeah. And in addition to that, each of them had their own power, their own function that they were meant to really lean into and hone. As we know, sphere to square, which the phrase had not come up yet, but that is its origin story. We get, I believe, who the sixth sister, who is the youngest, who is given the power of essentially being the Watcher.
But they
And
call her the Observer,
but they
which
call her
is
the
so
yeah, exactly. And so what's really interesting is that all of the other sisters are getting along. They are clearly a unit. They are a group together, hanging out all the time. And the youngest is the outcast. She hangs out more with ALLMOTHER, and this is where more overtly, because we talked a little bit about this jealousy thread that we see between Iris and Zhao. But with the sisters, this is perhaps maybe the most obvious sign of like, the ALLMOTHER literally tells the youngest they are jealous of your relationship with me. And that's, they're just going to have to deal with that, or something along those lines.
She's intentionally setting them against each other.
Exactly. Which, that on another level struck a chord with me, because I think especially with groups of like women, and how oftentimes there can be this element of like one-upmanship or jealousy, in terms of being like, I want to find that success as a woman. I cannot bring, like, if I get it or if I don't get it because of another woman, then it's like there's only enough space. I forget what the phrase is, but there's like that competitive nature, I think, that sometimes, especially in corporate environments, can really come through. And so it was really interesting, and that struck a chord with me. On the top of this like diaspora layer that we've been discussing is this idea of relationships between women. Even though the woman technically is like herself many times over. So I thought that was also pretty poignant about this idea of like cliques and jealousy and yeah.
And I think like the important to call out to the like rules that she's laid down. The like, only I am allowed to clone anyone. You are not allowed to clone yourselves. And it's very much like a like forbidden fruit in the garden situation. Like, here's the one thing you're not allowed to do. And right before we break into this flashback, we do learn that Iris is somehow responsible for killing this like military faction. That I don't know that we learn who the voice is coming from. It might have been Picture Zhao, but it's like, you did this, like talking to Iris. So again, I have to like, I'm now suspect of everything that we're watching. Like, how much of the story about these sisters is true versus what the youngest, now the principal, wants us to believe is true about Iris. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it might be that all of it's true. I don't know, but like, I now have to be suspicious of. We know that these memories can be changed. Like, I'm just
Mm-hmm.
so suspicious of what we're seeing. Like, did the mother really set up the youngest to be a pariah among the other sisters? Did she really assign them colors because she couldn't tell them apart? Like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, but like, I don't know anymore. I just don't know.
Yeah, no, wait, we don't know. And I think that for me, it even though I didn't overtly note that, I think increasingly I did get more sort of wary as I played, because the whole time I will say the sort of this like oppressive and like very claustrophobic weight to this chapter in particular, it just
Oh,
felt very like omnipresent to me. And I thought again, perhaps it was moving from like this sort of third person, you can move around in 360 like full movement, to going to more of a two-dimensional feel. Like that felt very constrictive to me, and it came across just in terms of anxiety as I was playing, like in
yeah.
a good way, but yeah. um
I think the last thing I'll call out before like the big reveal that you get at the end of this section is again Healer's response to this, which is
mhm.
as she's seeing that the original sisters were fully immune, were not wearing masks, and she says, "Why do I have to work every day in fear?" Because she sees like there's no reason that all of these women
Mhm.
have to die. There's no reason for it.
Yeah.
Which again kind of calls into question like losing faith in your God. Like maybe the God is real,
Mhm.
but it's not one that I want to believe in anymore.
Right. Yeah. Oh. Oh, that's good. So one, I also want to. We're hopping around because kind of like the game though. The game hops around, so
Mm.
you know I think this feels very on theme
Yeah, for
with
sure.
with how the story's told. Um, what I think is also interesting is as we are walking through this memory, this communion, we do see a very familiar sort of alcove with dirt and rocks and drawings all around it. And we have a moment where Healer looks, and it's like the childlike anime drawings
Mm-hmm.
that Iris did. And they're posted on these rocks. And Healer does say, I'm like sick of these drawings. I don't like them. Art can work sharper than a scalpel sometimes. And this, like, I'm not about this. I thought that was really,
It
uh,
really showed how jaded she is to the whole
yeah.
system.
Yes, because this is their, like, these are their prophetic teachings.
Prophetic. That is exactly the word, Jenny. Oh, yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
It's so good. So we encounter this game of hide and seek. So again, as the youngest is trying to hang out with the rest of the group, they're like, let's play hide and seek. And
You know where this is going.
the watcher just has an absolutely horrible time of it because watcher finds no one. um Spends basically all day all night looking for her sisters, and some of them are sitting in plain sight, but then as soon as you try to get to them, it's like, nope, that's actually not, that's not Fixer, that's not Knower. And your heart kind of breaks, honestly. Like, I
Yeah.
felt so bad because I'm just like, to be a kid, because they're all kids essentially, they're all new to the world. To want to try and fit in, the earnestness with which Watcher tried,
Mm.
I think is the thing that really got me. And I think you could even kind of encourage Watcher a little bit in your dialogues with her, or be like, no, just like rest, just
Yeah.
stop. um and so yeah, that was just a really heartbreaking scene for me.
I totally agree. And I will add to that the I'm going to come back to this like word jaded,
Mm-hmm.
because she is the youngest. She was made after the original sisters were made. And so you can see that they are already jaded against the All Mother to some degree. They don't have this religious fervor that the
Mm-hmm.
youngest does have, that like very naive, like, I'm supposed to be watching you from the second floor balcony because that's my function. And like, why would I ever doubt my function? And the other women are just like you're like, we were just given these, like, because
Yeah.
we needed to be told apart and we were like clashing with each other. I think that's what they said. Like they were given functions because there was like arguments or something like that. And so, yeah, I just think like this idea of like the loss of innocence is really important. I haven't quite put my finger on like what is happening with that yet, but we are seeing cycles of how the sisters interact. We see after the hide and seek game, it's Fixer is kind of the first one to be like, "Hey, sorry about that. Like that wasn't cool. Like we should hang out sometime."
Right. Let's actually try to be friends, basically.
Yeah.
During I can't remember if it was during hide and seek or sort of right in the aftermath of it. I think it was maybe in the aftermath of it. There is something that the youngest finds amidst that alcove of drawings, which is really, again, this was another who put this here moment, because this really conspicuously placed journal was set in the middle of the alcove. And the journal, it looked like kind of a kid's journal with like a dragon in the front. So maybe like a Year of the Dragon sort of theme. And you're like, let's read it. And in it, that's what I felt too.
I thought Trogdor from Homestar Runner. So you're better than me.
Yeah, that could be valid. Trogdor is a classic. And so the youngest reads the journal and essentially learns about Iris and Zhao and their relationship. And the connections that the youngest makes is ALLMOTHER is lonely. And I understand this loneliness and I want to do something to help. And it just so happens there is a strand of hair in the journal. Now, what in this sort of obtuse, like earnest yet obtuse kind of way, the youngest says, "Oh, well, Mother said not to pluck a hair from our own head to create sisters. But what if I didn't pluck? It's already there." Which I'm like, girl, I'm sorry. That's not.
Honestly, I was on board. I thought even beyond just the letter of the law, I was like, well, the spirit of this is don't make more clones of yourself.
Absolutely.
And so I was like, oh yeah, she's in the clear. She's totally good to do this, was my thought. It didn't even occur to me that it would be a bad thing.
Oh my gosh. I was like, this is not going to turn out well. I was like, I want it to happen because I'm very interested in what's going to happen next. But,
I will say, biblical allusion on this point. Like the story of like the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve, eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge. When Eve is talking to the snake before taking the bite, she makes up the reason why you're not allowed to eat. She says, well, like we were told if we eat it, we will surely die, which is not what they were told. And then the snake says, you won't die. Like God will just be jealous that like you are seeing things how he sees them. Like that's essentially like the thrust of the story. And when she like makes this justification up, I was like, this is exactly like the parallel structure of that story. And to your point, like, who is the snake? Who is the snake? Who's putting the book there? Who's putting the hair there? What's going on? I'm eager.
Yeah, because again, the youngest, as we know in chapter 5, the youngest is the principal. The principal has been setting up a lot of this for the other sisters. So it's like, did ALLMOTHER place this journal? Did ALLMOTHER set, like, was this some sort of test for the youngest? That was my initial prediction. But yeah.
I mean, what I wrote down at this point is, whose clones are these really? Because I am now of the mind that like, are all of these clones actually descendants of the youngest and not the ALLMOTHER? And maybe that's the real reason they don't have immunity.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Isn't that what we learned later?
Did we?
Well, did we? Maybe not.
I don't remember learning that yet, and literally, but maybe I just missed it. But I definitely wrote it down.
Or maybe because I wrote down, maybe that was a prediction, because I wrote that down, but it might have been a prediction. I just didn't write down that it was a prediction.
Because at this point, so we haven't like just said it yet, but like basically like she clones Zhao. You go to this party, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna give Mother this gift. You show her clone Zhao, who's like half baked, I guess is the way I would describe her. Like half of her face is melted off, but literally like seems like she has the ability to become an intelligent, self-aware person. As far as I could tell from that flashback, Mother slits her throat, like immediately slits her throat, and then removes immunity from the existing sisters. And I was like, that just strikes me as not possible. Like that.
Yeah, to me, okay, because as I read like biblical stories, for example, I'm like, they're allegorical, so they are extensions of tales which may be more fantastical and not possible in real life, meant to be real world lessons that you draw from, but it's like you literally aren't going to do the exact thing that's happening in the stories. And so for me, this felt very much like one of those biblical sort of allowances where I think they're like, she plucked the strand of hair that gave them the immunity. I'm like, okay, she didn't go around like literally pull a hair out of their heads that was like the immunity hair. Like she did something to them somehow that took away their immunity. Or go ahead.
No, say it. Or
no, you do it.
Or they were never immune at all, which is what I wrote down in this moment, because I was like, if the military, as they were cloning her, what we learned is they could not pass on her immunity. I was like, if the military couldn't figure out how to do that, how did she figure out how to do that? And so one of the theories that I'm working with, I have two right now. First theory at this point, because this is before I knew that, the youngest was kind of the principal of all this. My first theory was the ALLMOTHER introduced the disease into the orchard, that it wasn't there, it was a clean space, and then the mother introduced it after this kind of Zhao clone incident. But now what I'm wondering is, did the mother leave and did the youngest just murder the other sisters and start cloning from herself?
Ooh, yeah, I didn't think about, so I one of my theories is that all of the clones we know now are the clones of the youngest. But I did not think about how she may have also murdered the sisters and it wasn't ALLMOTHER in the first place. That is intriguing.
I mean, she's wearing a mask, but we don't know if she needs the mask.
Because it's easy to just put it on, fit in. Dang. Yeah, this is where, again, this whole game for me, every time I do a chapter is like, now we're really off the rails.
Yeah.
And then the next chapter I'm like, oh, okay, this is really off the rails. So at this point I was just like, what could happen next?
I do think there's like a conversation at the end of this that we really do have to highlight, and that is with Healer, where Healer's like, Healer she chooses not to watch the end of Communion because she's like, I see where this is going. And then they have the conversation and they fill her in. She's like, yep, that's what I figured. She's really upset. And essentially, like, at this moment, explicitly calls out the Watcher for turning in Fixer, who she knew she had feelings for. And also in this conversation, though, Healer says something, Watcher says something like, your greatest fear should be crossing her. So it's like, oh, Watcher is not the faithful person that she's pretending to be. She's reacting out of fear, which is obviously like a very common thing in high control environments with religious fervor happening.
Right.
And then there's the quote, like, it's your choice to turn in Healer. And I was like,
yep.
The introduction of free will after the loss of innocence is again, a major parallel back to that. Like, this game. This game.
Yeah, I wrote that down and underlined it twice. I wrote free will, boom, boom,
boom, boom.
Yeah. I I will say I really admired Healer for the way that she addressed this and just was like, I just need to hear you say it. I just need to hear you say it.
Yep.
Like, and you know what? You now have another choice because you know where I stand.
Yeah.
Do what you will. And I was like, dang, Healer's got like just so strong. I feel like I was surprised because again, Healer was physically like quite weak. And so I think seeing this just resilience in her was really cool by the end of this communion.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I also wanted to highlight again, because I mentioned it last episode, where in the present time in the orchard, you look at these gravestones, and I thought originally that they were from the high school, but
Yeah,
we
you're
now
right.
know from this communion with Healer that these grave markers are not the other high school students. These are actually the remains of the other sisters. Oh, and that got me. Just this whole section, this whole game, honestly gets me.
I have a theory that because they keep referencing that like you have to burn bodies after they die. I have a theory that it is the bodies of these sisters that is allowing the disease to permeate in the orchard.
Ooh, because they're buried potentially.
Yeah, maybe.
Like the markers aren't just markers, like they're actual grave sites.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So I don't know.
That's good.
Something.
Yeah. So, and then I know we spent a lot of time in that chapter. I think chapter 4 is also a beefy one. Chapter 5 has a lot of like a lot of things, but it's a quick one.
Yeah.
For chapter 4, we so is this? I'm trying to remember where we're at.
We come in and you're kind of isolating during a social event, and
right, because it's birthday.
Birthday.
Yeah. It's
everyone's birthday.
That's right.
And is it also New Fixer Day? Is that
it is?
It's New Fixer Day.
New Fixer Day and birthday.
And there's kind of some interesting call outs here that like you have not engaged the new fixer yet. People are a little like, hey, why aren't you doing this? Like that kind of thing. There were just a few things I want to call out before kind of the main action of this, which is the quote, it is the youngest sin that we must rid from ourselves. Very much that like the original sin idea coming through. Someone that I don't remember who. It's the principal. The principal, as a part of the recap, calls the Zhao clone a monstrosity, and it's just like that is a very interesting thing to say, given that we know she's the one who made it, and two, again, I don't know that she's any different than the other clones. Like, there's nothing fundamentally different between them.
Yep. What I loved, did you see the memory between Fixer and Watcher? The singing one.
The singing one was so good. And she's like saying something like, this all feels so far away from me now. Was it that one?
Yes, where she sings the song, and honestly, that got me teary. I thought it was really beautifully done. Whoever the voice actor was who did the singing for that, amazing job. I'm like, oh, if this is on the soundtrack, I'll listen to it and cry. You know, it's just so good because you hear Fixer, and we don't know how far ahead of the train this is, but we know that Fixer essentially has been like struggling with her faith for quite some time alone. And she has this song and she's like, should I sing it today at the birthday party? And when you listen to the lyrics, it really is about her feeling so alone, trying to get close to Mother, but is just feeling just distant, continuously distant. I took screenshots of it, and I'll post it in the Discord just so we can get the lyrics officially and folks can reread it if they would like to. But I thought that was a really beautiful moment. And it's one that I think you can technically miss because it's one of those memories that's not a required, mandatory to progress the story event.
Exactly. It's interesting, this idea of like losing faith, because this is also the moment that I kind of lost faith in what are we even doing here. There's another line in this section that says like, the Mother shields us from the terror of the occupants. And I was like, wait a second, what is the Mother actually trying to do here? Like, is she gonna fight off the occupants? Why? Like, they have this little cloistered place. They seem fine. What are we like? What is her actual objective right now? And I'm glad that I wrote that down, because as the story progresses, you start realizing that like maybe there isn't a strong desire to get rid of these occupants after all.
No. Well, and again, in the first section of the game that we played, we had Fixer tell us, I believe, yeah, it was Fixer who told us, like, she talks with the occupants. Like, they're in cahoots somehow. And, you know, at this point, we don't know how deep that goes. But as we continue to play, we realize it is a lot deeper than I think that I predicted.
Yeah, same.
At least.
100%.
So yeah, I think this idea of the occupants, I think this idea of the external, like something out there being scary, us in here are safe. Like the us versus them is very prevalent throughout this game, and sort of this imaginary enemy, this imaginary danger. And maybe it's a very real danger, but I think the reality is it's not actually coming from the external source. It's like coming literally from within the house.
Yes.
From whether it's ALLMOTHER, the youngest, you know, whoever it is. So
speaking of from within the house, as you eventually do make your way to this party, you have a little brief conversation with Secretary as you're like walking towards the bar, and you say something like, "Is this life?" And Secretary responds, "I wouldn't know anything about that." Which is a shocking response, because in the first communion, she says that thing about how she doesn't want to die. Yes. And I was like, what is going on with Secretary? Even more so, what is going on here?
Yeah, I know. I wrote, where is Secretary from? Because at that point, I was like, at first I was like, maybe Secretary is like some technology from you know, all of this technology. That's cool. But yeah, some of these lines that Secretary puts out at what feels to be random moments or really off moments, like the "I want to live." This line right here, I think later on, Secretary like kind of like neighs when you talk about this horse.
Yes. Eventually you do a communion when this one, and you're in front of a giant horse statue. It's like 3, 2, 1, neigh. And the whole point of you being at the statue is that no one knows what this thing is. So the fact that Secretary says neigh is like, well, someone knows something. What is happening here?
Yeah, I was like, Secretary wasn't a question in my mind, but the more we play, the more questions I have about Secretary and like what her deal is. I love Secretary though, I will say, like, something about Secretary really did embed into my heart, which makes what happens that we'll talk about in a little bit just all the more brutal. But yeah, we decide to go up, socialize. It's happy hour. It's our birthday, you know. It's Fixer Day.
New Fixer Day.
It's New Fixer Day. We gotta go hang out with everyone. And we're getting to know Fixer. It's a little awkward.
You hear as you're walking up that the other sisters and Shells do not like her, which is again like we're repeating some of these cycles of isolation again. And you do in that you get the opportunity to kind of repair things with her and be like, let's work through this.
Yeah. Did you choose that, or did you choose to be more standoffish?
I chose bury the hatchet. So just kind of saying like, let's move forward, and
that's what I picked
apologize.
But these celebrations are interrupted quite abruptly with an occupant attack. Everything goes red. Everything locks down. The whole orchard begins to shake. Like there's an earthquake happening, big cataclysm, you know, sort of like just dire situation. And when you wake up, like everything has changed.
I will say it was odd to me in that moment, because you're talking about this earthquake thing. Like people are literally sliding down the floor as though the floor has like been tilted. And this, like, I couldn't help but wonder, like, are we in a ship of some kind? Do we know that we're actually on the ground or underground?
I'm still unsure if we're in a physical world.
You called that out last time, and we got to get into that. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. I'm like, I feel like we're we're on a certain layer of like digital world.
We're incepted somehow.
Yeah, we're like in inception layers. Like I think communion is like a layer down and we're a layer up, but we're still not in reality.
Yeah.
But yeah, when we wake up, it is just like chaos, tragedy, mayhem, because many of the sisters have died during this occupant attack.
It was awful hearing these stories.
It was horrible. Yeah, it's really interesting because in playing this game, I was like, oh, all these characters, you know, they are the same visual character. You distinguish them by colors. They have these traits that we have been able to distinguish them with. Like there's the conspiracy shell, the thoughtful shell, the more aggressive shell. They all have these traits that sort of are personality traits that define them more clearly for us as players as we talk. And I was really struck by how sad and connected to these characters I felt in only having talked to them really 3 different times, because we've gone through like 3 different communions. It was a really rough scene to play.
You're hearing like some people who's like, oh, their mask cracked, like just a hairline fracture and they passed, like the new fixer is dead. Yep. You have others just like, I fell down the stairs and my arm landed on this other shell and I broke her neck. And it's just like, brutal.
What do you say to that? Yeah, like, well, and it was weird because also she was like the unlucky shell, and Watcher says like, well, maybe like now you're lucky.
Yeah.
I was just like, oh my God. Yeah, it's and you see them all reacting in very, like, they're all traumatized. So there was one of the orange shells, I think one of the more aggressive ones, she's just like, see, this is why we have to be like constantly vigilant. We need to start training now. And there are like dead bodies right next to her and she's just ready to train. There's one who, I forget, she starts kind of laughing. I think she's another blue shell, like another Watcher, and she just starts saying really ominous stuff. I didn't write that down, but I remember reading it and be like, you're not okay.
Yeah.
But Watcher's just kind of like, I guess you're fine, bye.
You meet up with BBF and BBF is just like in shambles. Like, oh, my defenses did nothing. It didn't even alert us that something was happening, which again, like immediately alarm bells going off.
Yeah.
I did notice in this, in BBF's distress, she starts really like laying into herself and she goes into a lot of alliteration. I'm a foolish, facile, like on and on and on. Like, what is going on with that? Like, it felt like a really odd layer of dialogue, and BBF has kind of been acting strangely since staring out at the rain, but it felt so like, shock is one thing. Shock that sends you into alliteration is not something I'm familiar with. So what's going on here?
I also did not know. I did write down that the letter F is the 6th letter of the alphabet and there are 6 sisters. So I was just like,
this is like Lost level theories. I love it.
I know. I was just like, that's the only thing. But I also did notice that as well. It's just carnage. And the end sort of goal of this section of the game is to find Knower.
Yes.
Our purple sister. And we find her in front of a statue of a horse. And while Knower knows it's called a horse, like you mentioned, she also is like, we know nothing of any of it.
Yeah.
We don't know what it eats, how it works. Like we don't know. But what does it make you think of? And I'm really curious, what did you pick for the word that it made you think of?
I think I picked the one, I don't remember if it was exactly true, something like strength or something along those lines. And they talk, when you click that one, it's just like, it's like really musculature and really big and like would be a really terrifying presence or something like that, which I thought was an interesting outcome. How about you? What did you pick?
Yeah. I picked Giddy.
Oh.
And she was like interesting, like very joyful, like must be an interesting outlook you have on life.
Did you, there's also in the sequence when you're talking with one of the like maybe fixers in training or something, you get asked what percentage your mask is at. Like, is it broken?
Yeah.
And I said it was 100% and just kind of moved on.
Same.
Okay.
Yeah. I said it was 100%. But as soon as I said that, I wished I had picked like it's cracked, because then that would have, I felt like that would have maybe illuminated something more interesting.
I thought the exact same thing.
Yeah.
I thought and did the exact same thing.
Yep. I was like, oh, I clicked it too fast, because I was just like, I'm going to be honest.
Yeah,
Like,
I'm good.
wait,
I'm not
I
coughing,
don't know.
so it must be good.
Yeah. And again, it's one of those, we had a dialogue at some point. I don't remember if it was in this section with BB or earlier, perhaps with BB, but the sisters talk about how the occupants are kind of fluid like water. Like if they were to attack, it's like we don't know, you know, how they could come about and how they could come through, but it's not like we have a big wall and they're going to stop. It's like they can get in. And so it's just a matter of like, how can we sort of play more defensive? I forget the exact nature of the conversation. I wish I wrote it down. But I think also to our theory of perhaps, at least from the disease portion, like the disease is just there and has always been there. I felt like that was something where I thought back to, because again, um, who's to say like there isn't just a button that's like, okay, well, if I'm first youngest daughter, I press the button that just says occupants arrived, cause a panic, get
Yep.
rid of a bunch of sisters, reinforce the fear,
Yep.
and use that as a means of control.
You know what I'm wondering too right now? With your Inception idea, are you still in your first communion? Is everything that we are witnessing just you continuing to witness through Mother's murder? And the reason I say this is because, just kind of like broadly speaking, what's going to happen is in your communion with Knower, you begin, first of all, you get another like really interesting change in gameplay. You're like inside this cavern. I had a hard time seeing it first, but once I got the hang of it, it was a very cool experience. It's just like the mechanic is you can find these like memory people that are just kind of around, and you talk to them and you see lines of dialogue that you have seen already in your communion. And then eventually you can go talk to the occupants. And it's unclear if the occupants have invaded your communion, if they were supposed to be there and have always been there. But basically, by having these conversations with these characters, which you've already had, you learn how to talk with them. You learn the like kind of code, if you will. But what struck me with how you just said that was like, eventually you meet up with, you take the train. This is like the chapter 5. You take the train, you meet up with ALLMOTHER, you stab her. The youngest gets off the train, right? And then it moves to this surreal landscape again. And there are these doors that pop up. And it's in this chapter 4 section in your communion that you learn what those little orange spirals are that you've been navigating through memory of. They call them nodes, and essentially say like, wait, that's the same thing that is over the halo of the occupants. So one, occupant technology has somehow been involved in all of these communions, and you have been using it to traverse memories. And two, after you kill the ALLMOTHER, you go through another one to get into this like liminal space as a part of it. And so I'm just like very much wondering if, to your point, are we incepted? Is this all still part of one communion? Like, what is that? Like, I don't know. So many theories.
Yeah. I will say the phrase that they continue to say that I found myself thinking a lot more about was the us is a weave that can be unpicked. So again, it brought me back to the 6 to 1 phrase that we hear a lot as well. The idea that everyone here is intertwined, but this idea of picking at something, like when you're jealous and you're picking at things, you're trying, and when you're like maybe if you don't like someone, you often hear like, oh, well, you keep picking at me, you know, and you keep trying to like nag at me. And so this idea of the us as a weave that can be unpicked is one we hear a lot in this chapter, because that is part of the decoding that we need to do. But I think, again, it goes back to a lot of this idea of individuality, meeting jealousy, community, like, how does that relate to how you interact and love people? But also, yeah, I don't know. It's just
the ways we connect to people, I think, is a really important next point. So as you go through and you learn how to talk with the occupants in this dream, you learn their story, that essentially like they are aliens from some sort of solar system that has two stars that are maybe colliding, and they had to leave and they ended up on Earth. And essentially what you learn is there is a direct parallel between them and Zhao in terms of like, I am out of my comfort zone. They adopt human form, like these big red figures we've been seeing, to just try and fit in. They are really curious about like our double helix, our DNA.
right.
Like they're doing everything they can to communicate with us, and it's just not working. And so like you get this direct parallel with them and the Zhao storyline, like the real life Zhao storyline. And then eventually you also see that the only person that they can connect with was Iris, and that they see her as like the single point connection to them that they can communicate with. So again, like that, the Zhao connection there like really stood out to me. What were some of the things that stood out to you as we were learning more about the occupants?
I think what really, again, going back to this idea of the diaspora and generational sort of trauma related to having to leave your home, or not even your home, but like a place that didn't even necessarily exist in the first place or doesn't exist anymore. You see this with the occupants where presumably if their home still exists, it won't for much longer because of their system collapsing and these two stars colliding. What I thought was really wonderful was one of the segments is an encounter with doors, and we actually are talking to Iris's mother behind the doors.
Such a moment.
Oh my gosh, there's one line the mother says that I wrote down, that's, I dream every night of going back home, haunted by a place that doesn't exist. And we know that her mother has left Hong Kong amidst years of protests against the government. And so this idea of like that home that she remembers perhaps not being there anymore. We see this with Iris. Of course, as you mentioned, we see this with Zhao. So I think this idea of what does it mean to feel like you don't have a home to go back to was one that I felt connected with me the most as we were playing this section.
I totally agree with that. Man, the idea that the only way we get to conceptualize Iris's mother is through a closed door was like that really got me. That was like such a like it communicated so much with a single image, and I thought it was just so well done. The things that really stuck out to me in addition to all of this is we also get this weird shift in perspective as you talk with the occupants. Like after you successfully have a conversation, you get like I don't know if it's a memory or what, but essentially it's like the one that was most palpable to me is a first person view. You maybe are an occupant. And you are chasing Zhao through the streets, and it seems as though she is running from you specifically. It's unclear if it's like you're an occupant. Is this still Iris's memory? It seems like there's a personal like Iris, what are you doing thing, which we've already talked about in this episode. Like I am, number one, the shift in perspective was really impactful, going from in this very dark cave to first person above a city. I'm kind of flying as I'm chasing this girl down the streets.
Yeah. Which, and I don't know if you panned up, but you can, like, beyond the building, you can see other, I presumed, occupants, like, coming down. So this is, like, in the midst of them all arriving to Earth. So very, like, honestly just scary and tense and chaotic. Just so good though.
One of the big things that happens near the end of this chapter is we get a flashback to Iris being surrounded by a bunch of guards. They are right up next to a giant occupant, and you learn that that Iris was kind of given a gift, or given the opportunity to ask for something from the occupants. And what she essentially wishes is that everyone would just drop dead. And so for me, it's like, is this everyone? Like, is it just the 50 that are around her? Like, what does this mean?
Yeah. I also was very curious, because part of me has wondered at that point. I'm like, is this one of those like unfortunate genie wishes where she has created a situation where no one will survive but her? Um, yeah, so that was where my thought immediately went when I saw that, and I saw sort of the aftermath of what her wish resulted in.
We also learn, right, because we're learning about gifts. We also learn in this moment that Secretary is an occupant, and perhaps a gift or a portion of an occupant. And obviously, like, you as the watcher are really like upset about this. And I think you hear from the Secretary, it might be in this moment or soon after, she's like, I didn't know, which was like, what is happening? Like, I am just so far, like, so deep down the rabbit hole at this point.
And the scene that we get is Watcher loses it a little bit, or a lot of it. A lot of it. Watcher essentially takes Secretary, and with her bare hands, like, attempts to bash Secretary to pieces against the ground. That does not work. And she just piece by piece pulls this, I would say, I guess for lack of a better word, like, machine apart. And that was really hard to watch. It was hard because you can hear Secretary's very human sounding voice. Childlike voice. Amidst, what otherwise, like, if you saw it, I would have felt very like, okay, we're seeing a machine being broken apart. But I think the additional layer of the voiceover just oh man, it got like right up to the line for me, where I was like, I don't know.
It was brutal. Really it was very brutal.
Yeah. So that, for me, that was one of those jaw-dropping moments where I was looking at this, like, my jaw had dropped. I was staring at the screen like, what is happening right now?
Yeah, very intense. You do get an exchange with Nowhere at the end of this, where you learn that the last Watcher committed suicide, that, like, she was too emotional, was kind of how Nowhere frames it.
Yes.
Which very, the classic matchup against, like, knowing versus feeling, which I thought was interesting. But you also learn that Nowhere does see the All-Mother as God, and one that is not to be crossed. Very much like, you live in fear of this God type of person.
Yeah, I think she says, you have a home, you have sisters who love you, you have food, just, like, be happy, be grateful. Which, oh God.
I was raised with that message, just as an FYI. Like,
it's messed up. Like,
it's
just horribly messed up.
Man.
And so, again, a really stark contrast to what we had with Healer just a chapter ago, where Healer is really a lot of the opposite. I think also it's really interesting to me that Watcher, she talks a lot about how Watchers are known for getting into their feelings. And I'm interested, what do you think about that? Because that, for me, was kind of, especially knowing, like, I would have perhaps predicted, like, Healer, for example, would have maybe gotten more in her feelings, or even BB with, like, war and military. There's, I think, perhaps a lower hanging fruit of, aggression, anger, feelings there. Why do you think Watchers are known for that?
I have a few thoughts on this. Like, one of them is, I have been wondering since this chapter if the other sisters get communion at all, if they ever get flashes, and if that's why they are standing apart, and that's why they're more jaded. And I got to imagine, if you come from this, like, point of innocence, and you are a Watcher who is going to be observing all of this stuff happening, if that loss of innocence doesn't have to fundamentally break you in some way, in a way that the other sisters aren't broken, because they are just, like, almost being raised normally. Like when you walk around and talk to the shells, like, yeah, there's the religious fervor, but like you start hearing them kind of sniping at each other and like, oh, I can't believe she got picked. Like, you know, like that kind of energy. And I just can't help but wonder if the other sisters do in fact get communion at all, or if that is something that only watchers get, and that's what makes them watchers.
Yeah, well, I think from my understanding, watchers all like lead the communion. They have to be present for it. But I think because from previous conversations, it sounds like, oh, we got to go do communion with Watcher. So it sounds like they've done communion
yes, there's
before.
some familiarity, less fear.
Yeah, but perhaps, Watcher is the only one who has to do all of it.
Yeah.
So Watcher is privy, which I think Keeler does say. Watcher is just, or Knower says, Watcher's privy to much more than everyone. Everyone gets pieces of it, but I think you're right. Having to bear the weight of all of the communions would not leave you in a good mental state, I feel like.
Yeah, and she explicitly says that she's looking for purpose now because she knows that the All-Mother is in league with the occupants, and that's who, like, she is, because of what has happened with all the sisters that were just murdered, essentially. She is furious with the occupants, wants to kill them. She has said this several times since the, like, whatever happened during the birthday party. So it was that's why there's this aggression towards Secretary. It is all just a very different energy than we have seen from her before, which is why it's chapter 5.
Yeah.
She breaks apart Secretary and she is waiting for the train.
Yes.
And my literal first thing I wrote down here is, she's waiting for the train. How? Exclamation point. Because everything else that we have experienced at this point has been very linear from Watcher's perspective. This thing happens, and this thing happens. And this is like, you are having an imagined conversation with Fixer. You are just at the train tracks. There was no transition. You don't know how or when you got invited to get onto the train. The last thing we saw, you were locked down in a bunker because of the attack. And then you continue to go forward, and we get that whole sequence playing out where you show up to the All-Mother, you surprise her, you stab her in the back. And for me, it was like, we have just brought surrealism into the real world. So to your Inception point earlier, like, there's no way that we are in the real world. What is happening?
Yeah. I also, that scene change was really abrupt. And at first I was like, is this another memory? Is Watcher simply just reliving the goodbye just because she's now feeling all of this extra regret as based on her experiences? And then when she was like, oh, the train's here, gotta get on, I was like, what? Wait, we're really at the trains. I was very surprised. Because I also had assumed or presumed that the train only came when a sister was being called, not that it was like on a schedule in which
you could just show up.
I
have the same exact thoughts.
Yeah. And so part of me is also just like, again, Fixer asked this in the very beginning. How does this train work? Who pushes the button? How does it go? How does it come back? This is another case of like, we don't know who's controlling all of this stuff here, which I wrote down, where is Principal? Because we don't see Principal at the party. We don't see Principal afterwards when we're consoling the sisters. So I was also very curious, like, at that point, I was just like, is Principal dead? Is Principal like a part of something? Which we now know, yes. But yeah, so that was a very... I really well done conversation. Again, all of this is really well done, so it feels like a moot point to say,
intimate.
But
it felt really intimate.
So intimate. That's a great word for it. Yeah, I think the idea of regret and like, man, I had like, if I had known what was going to happen, like, this is the stuff I would have said differently, or like, this is how I wish I could have responded. That was such a just a real feeling and a moment that I was like, man, they captured that so well, because Fixer is a memory and is just going through the conversation as Watcher remembers it. Yeah. And so Watcher is just kind of speaking over Fixer even in some points, because Watcher just needs to say what she needs to say.
Yeah.
I thought it was just so good.
It was so good.
So we have gone through really like the biggest bulk of chapter 5. As we are winding down, I will say there was some real, like, ALLMOTHER wasn't who she didn't react how I thought perhaps she would, and it threw me for a loop.
So, number one, ALLMOTHER is not expecting you, the watcher, to be there. Number two, after you stab her, the youngest comes on a train. So we're back to like, who is running the trains? How is it that, like, could she always get on the train? It immediately raised the question for me, like, why didn't she come and stab ALLMOTHER? The thing that was like really palpable was just how detached from reality ALLMOTHER was. Like, to the point, like, you've used the word thousands of years like a couple times now, but like she says like, oh, you're like the youngest, like I just saw you, and she's like, that was 1,000 years ago. I was blown away by that.
Yeah. And ALLMOTHER, the way that they modeled her face was really different to Principal in particular. I think like the framing of the eyes, like ALLMOTHER's eyes are very like wide and confused. She even says as she turns to, I think, Watcher, like muy muy, which was the term of endearment that her father used for her. And so she doesn't, we've been told about this fearsome, like violent, not to be crossed God. And when we see ALLMOTHER, she is very like, I almost felt like she was sort of like an elder who had like slight dementia. You know, that feeling of like an elder who's disoriented. She is just not part of like the same place we are. And I immediately was like, we started something really bad. ALLMOTHER may not have been the greatest god, but something horribly wrong has happened, and we have been a pawn in someone's game.
Yes, I totally feel that. The fact that the last thing that she says to youngest is that she missed her, like, that got me. And it, like, again, I'm at this point where I'm like, the only person we've seen being malicious this entire game is the Principal, is the youngest. And I immediately, like, once after the murder happens, that's when everything gets like very surreal. It seems like now the youngest is out to get you. She makes this all hands announcement that you have murdered the ALLMOTHER. And so it is all very, we get super surreal at this point. All these doors show up. Someone walks out of them that looks like a shadow of you. And then the only way out is to zip tie to one of those like orange nodes up in the air. And then you go even deeper into the memory or something. So this very last section, like, talk about like what you saw and experienced there.
Yeah. Are you talking about the,
you're like in the like orchard, but everything's like,
yeah. So what's really, again, I'm just like, the way that they have constructed this story, as you're zipping out, the screen goes black, you get the studio logo.
The started game.
As if you had just turned on the game. Notable difference, the studio logo, like Sunset Visitor, is covered in blood. The Fellow Traveler logo, covered in blood.
I did not notice this.
Oh my gosh. It's like, I was just like, what the haunting is this? So technically, I guess zipping out is the technical end of chapter 5. So if you also didn't play this, sorry, this actually is slight spoilers for like next week. But
I will say, when you get to this next part, though, it still says you're in chapter 5. Like,
it does?
Yeah, because I tried to save it because I was like, is this chapter 6? And it's like, no, you're still in chapter 5 during this portion.
Oh, okay. Well, so you start the game. So if you're playing, actually, this is probably a good note, because if you're like, what, that just happened, you have to click start as if you're about to just start the game. Don't try like load your save or like do anything like that. That might mess it up. Click start and you start the game, but immediately you're like, this is wrong because everything is red. It's occupant red.
And you talk.
you talk to Nowhere. Nowhere is there telling you that you need to say goodbye, but there's a lot more focus on the fact that I think, what does Nowhere say? Like, they haven't been incinerated. Like, the
The
bodies have
bodies have
not
not
been
been
burned.
incinerated. Yep.
Yeah. I guess, did you want to highlight any of their conversation with Nowhere?
No, I didn't have anything else to hit on
Yeah.
with that. But you just go through and you have this very surreal game of hide and seek where you find the original sisters and you have like three dialogue options. I can't remember what the first one is. One is set them free, one is burn them. Do you remember what the third one was?
I do not know.
What did you end up choosing generally for that?
I chose them set them free.
I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, oh, you're supposed to burn them. And I clicked burn the first time, and you have this really aggressive dialogue. It's like, burn. And I was like, that's not who I want. And so everyone else I set free.
Well, and also, I think one thing that's notable that we didn't mention, the nodes are all over the orchard as well, which that had not been the case.
That's the memory space sign, right? Like,
exactly. So I'm just like, we are now another layer in the Inception plane.
Yes.
I'm curious because I noticed, because I use the nodes to try and travel around, speed up my traversal. When you use them, they turn blue.
Yeah.
Did that happen before?
Yes, it does.
Okay, I just never noticed it because I was just like, why are they turning blue now? And I was just like, that's another weird thing.
Did you also notice? So Secretary is back. Yes. And Secretary is a different color than previously. Previously, she was a pretty strong blue, I would say.
Yep.
And now she's more of a purple. So maybe like when you mix red and blue, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yep. And when you talk to Secretary, you say, I'm sorry, I acted rashly. I forget the first thing Secretary says. I think Secretary is kind of just like, oh, it's okay. Or something that's kind of just like, that's fine. And then Secretary glitches out, essentially. And so that's another sign of like, not all is well here. You haven't just been, you haven't just reset Secretary back to factory conditions. Like something's
going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then kind of after you burn all of your original sisters, you kind of zip back to the orchard, and it's flooded the same way the world has looked flooded at these kind of like apocalyptic scenes, and you find yourself. And that is what I have as kind of the end of this section. Was there anything else that really stood out to you as part of this?
No. Other than I did also write, wow, exclamation points at the very end here. I did also note that speaking of flooding, we have seen another instance of flooding, which I thought was kind of interesting when you're going through, I think it was Healer's communion. It was beautiful. I took a screenshot just because I was like, I want to make this a background. But as you're running through communion, you're like running atop water.
Right.
And you see this city in the distance. And so it kind of evoked, again, this idea of flooding. Those are the only two times we've really seen water in that quantity.
And when really you ask for everyone to be dead.
Yes, that's true. Yes. Yeah. So again, I think this presence of a flood, I haven't made full connections yet, but there is, again, floods are very biblical as well. So
there is a line about, let's see if I can find it quickly. There was a line specifically about the flood starting, how like it started to rain red. That's what we read earlier. It's the first line of the scripture part. Like on the last month, last year, it rained red. So apparently it's always been raining red. Yeah. We didn't say this. When you see, when you're in Noah's communion and you see a picture of the earth and you learn what earth is and you learn what planets are, the earth is completely encapsulated by some red, it looks like two pyramids stacked on top of each other.
Yeah. Like a force field of some
force
sort.
Field or something. Like very looks like the technology of the occupants, which explains the red looking everything, which I was really struggling to understand. Like, is the red coming from the occupants? No, it's covering the whole earth at all times. Yeah, like
an actual filter has been placed. This is like so much. And it's really funny because just as a side note, when I made this playthrough, I did say, like, I did intentionally figure out where to stop because I was like, okay, I think these are probably going to be the beats that we want to stop at. But I will say I did like a how long to play. I used it for every game just to give us general ideas. And when I was looking through this, I was like, oh, this chapter for this person who I like quickly scrolled through to see like how long it took them to take the chapters, took them 2 hours. I was like, okay. So I wrote about 2 hours on my like the playthrough guide that we have on Notion. This did not take me 2 hours. I will say, if you are going through and talking to every sister, going and trying to find every like gray memory, yeah, this took me more than 2 hours for sure.
Yeah, I think I'm up to about 7.5 hours into this game at this point. So yeah, I'm not doing a whole bunch of side quests here. I'm pretty hard mainlining it, and they are. You know, I think someone once used the phrase thick to refer to this experience. I might use that for this as well.
Yeah. Wow. What a good phrase. I don't mind the word thick.
Again, no one said you did, Jenny. I don't know why there's a lot of aggression.
You know, I just have a lot of feelings. And, you know, watchers tend to have feelings.
Watchers do tend to have feelings.
So just to close up this week's discussion, again, the episodes are going a little longer for us here on the podcast, but that's because there is so much to talk about, and we haven't even like there are things that I've written down that we have not talked about that we had to just kind of like omit because of time. I know you're definitely also in the same boat.
So many notes.
There's so many notes. If you are interested, the time that we'll really dig in as a community, I wanted to just put that out there. So if you want to plan ahead, you can. June 29th, which is a Saturday, is our monthly hangout. It's when we all just hang out in Discord for about an hour and talk about the game, just anything that we wanted to bring up that are just easier to talk about in person, or if you have questions of other people and what folks thought of something, come with those questions, come with, you know, what you want to share. That'll be 3 p.m. Pacific time in Discord. Also, next week, the podcast will be covering topic of the week will be Steam Next Fest demos, and we will start with chapter 6. It's called I Want You to Call Me Blue. Interesting. And you will play until you complete chapter 8. And chapter 8 is titled Sometimes, and I think if you're playing with your achievements turned on, you'll see the achievement come up once you're done with the chapter, and it will be called Sometimes You Don't Fit in the Backpack.
Ooh.
Yeah, these are great chapter titles.
They are. It's been really good. It's so true.
So there's that. And as a final reminder and final housekeeping point, we are going to chat with the devs. We have an interview scheduled with them. It'll be the final podcast of the month. So once we're done with our like sort of, I guess, audio deep dive let's play of the game, the last week of June, we will be sharing our conversation with the developers. So if you've got questions, I've already got a few written down from folks, so thank you for sending them in. Continues to send them my way so that I can put them into the document that I've got, and we can be sure to ask as many of them as possible. And yeah, I think that is it.
Thank you so much, as always, for joining us here at Geeks and Grounds. Look forward to connecting with you all in the Discord or at geeksandgrounds.com. As you go about your weeks, may the threads that tie you and weave you with your community be as thick as this sewed.
Oh, God.
Bye!
Bye, everyone.